misery or victory in history. So this video is heavily inspired by Miss Bailey Sarian's Murder Mystery Makeup Mondays. So I will be linking her channel in the description down below. And for today, I will be doing my makeup while telling you a story about history that really piqued my interest. So at the end of this video, let's assess together if this particular scenario was considered a misery or it brought about victory in history. So let's get started. The first thing that I will be doing is to prep my skin. So I'll just use my sunscreen. So this particular makeup look is something that I just do on a normal day. It is very important to prep your skin whenever you're doing your makeup. And the same thing goes when you are preparing your outfit. As a woman, an outfit is very important for me. So women's fashion for me has always reflected more than just style. It also reflects history, culture, and in my case, control. So in this video, I am curious to see how women's clothing evolved from pre-industrial era to the height of the Industrial Revolution. To do that, let's go back to pre-industrial revolution England. In contrast to the popular petticoats and corsets that England is known for, we will be talking about how clothing shaped, and beyond that, how clothing shaped the lives of women and how it shaped women's role in society as well as the expectations of them. So before the Industrial Revolution, clothing was entirely handmade. So every stitch, every weave, and every dye was done manually. And it was often done by women in a household, from lower classes to upper classes, even in the nobility. During this time, fabrics were made from natural fibers such as linen, wool, hemp, and some cotton, although cotton was not yet widely available because it was harder to harvest and process. So safe to say, clothing was actually very expensive and it was time-consuming to make. So most women owned very few garments. So a basic wardrobe for a lot of women only involves one or two dresses. One is used for everyday use and the other one is used for special occasions. So the typical outfit of women in this era involved multiple layers. So there is a chemise or a shift. So this layer is the one responsible for warmth because it is the one closest to the skin. And another is the stays, which is an earlier form of corset. So apart from corsets, there were also layers of petticoats, which the goal is to become more modest. So on top of petticoats, there were also called this gown that is put on top of it. And then additional layers like aprons, cloaks, bonnets, and even shawls, depending on the weather or social occasion. So during this time, clothing was not about personal expression. It is about function, modesty, and conforming to the societal norms set for women. So corsets or stays were designed to create a silhouette for women that fits the standards of their time. So this prioritizes structure over comfort. However, there was a turning point, and this was the Industrial Revolution. And the late 18th and early 19th century really marked a turning point, especially in clothing, because the Industrial Revolution introduced mechanized tile production. So there were spinning jennies, power looms, and cotton gins, which made it possible to produce fabric quickly and affordably, and cottons were also processed faster. So cottons eventually replaced wool and linen because they were now more readily available. So because of the streamlining in the production of clothing, because of the mechanized production of fabrics, women's clothing was revolutionized forever. Garments are now made accessible and affordable, so even lower class women could afford it, when in contrast, upper class women had the access to clothing before. So in the industrial era, there was a growing middle and working class, and now they could afford a wide variety of clothing. So women could own more than just one or two dresses, and for the first time, ready-made clothing was an option for everyone. So unfortunately, with the advent of mass production, there were also newer expectations. And these expectations were a little bit too much. So with clothes becoming more and more available, women are becoming increasingly judged for their appearances and how well they are dressed, despite their social classes. So it doesn't matter anymore if you're from nobility or from the lower class. You have to be well dressed. And unfortunately, there is a darker side to the Industrial Revolution, and that is many women and even children are working under textile factories. Most of them face very harsh and even dangerous conditions. Inside of these factories, clothings are modest and functional. But of course, because of modesty, a lot of them wore long skirts and loose fabrics, which led to a series of accidents. Fashion, while more attainable for some, remained impractical and often hazardous for upper-class women, middle-class women, and more so for lower-class women. However, we are just getting started. So by the mid to late 1800s, Victorian fashion took femininity to theatrical extremes. So women's clothing became more of a symbol of status, propriety, and often pain. So if we see a typical Victorian era woman, when we search in the internet, we see these very big dresses and very big corsets. A key part of these gowns are crinolines, which in essence work as a cage-like structure made from steel and horsehair and were worn under skirts to create a massively bell-shaped silhouette. So even with the advances and the liberalization of women because of the Industrial Revolution, it was very evident that there was still an ideal silhouette that people want women to follow. So these crinolines replaced the layers and layers of petticoats. But unfortunately, they were bulkier, they were unwieldy, and of course, they were also dangerous. There were even incidents of skirts catching fire. They would get caught in machinery or in carriages. Another innovation that came with the Victorian era is called the bustle, which is a padding and a framework worn under the skirt to exaggerate the shape of the hips and the rear. So this is one of the signature looks of the Victorian era. So in this era, corsets became more popular than ever. So aside from corsets, waists were cinched down to an impossibly small size of 20 inches. And because this waist is not attainable for a lot of people, this caused a lot of health hazards. These hazards eventually manifested into fainting spells, digestive issues, breathing problems, and even organ displacement. However, it was not just clothing that was shifting. Beneath the lace and bone, societal shifts were brewing underneath. While women were increasingly expected to dress modestly and also fashionably, many began to question the limitations imposed by their clothing. Is that even healthy? Is that even safe? So slowly, function began to compete with form. And with that comes the beginning of practical fashion. So by the late 19th century, women's roles in society were evolving faster than ever. Middle-class women increasingly took jobs as teachers, nurses, and clerks, especially because women taking jobs are more normalized with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. And so fashion also responded to this shift with more practical and tailored options like walking suits, shirt waists, and long jackets that allowed for greater mobility while also appearing modest. So the rise of bicycles in the 1890s further transformed fashion because traditional skirts were impractical for riding. Loose trousers gathered at the ankles. So there was lesser distinction between classes because now it is between women's clothing and men's clothing. So these bloomers, what they call it, marked a subtle but significant shift towards functional fashion. So designers began to adapt clothing to women's changing lifestyles, and skirts became slightly shorter and fabrics lighter, and silhouettes are more relaxed, so it's not very rigid as it was in the Victorian era. And fashion was still dedicated by modesty and societal norms, but women were beginning to claim clothing that allowed them to move, work, and most importantly, breathe. So I could say that Industrial Revolution definitely had some darker sides, especially with slavery imperialism, and also the exploitation of labor from women and children, I could say that it also, in a sense, empowered women because the Industrial Revolution normalized working women. And because of this, I do think that clothing was not just a symbol of changing fashion, it was also symbolic about the gradual acceptance of women in society that was widely dominated by men. So what all started as homespun gowns, it evolved to factory-made fashion. The transformation of women's clothing between the pre-industrial and the Industrial Revolution tells us of a much larger story. Because for the women, during the era of the Industrial and pre-industrial revolution, clothing was not just about style. It was about labor, identity, social transformation, and social expectations. And sadly, clothing was also very symbolic of survival. So this shift from hand-sewn to machine-made garments did make fashion more accessible, but it also intensified the already existing pressures on women to meet the new standards of beauty and modesty, and often at the cost of comfort and safety. And unfortunately, because fashion is now evolving faster than ever, unlike before that fashion evolved through generations, it now evolves every year. So understanding all of this, we could see that evolution of clothing is not just about looking at pretty dresses during the Victorian era. It was also about recognizing how fashion reflects power, class, and gender norms across history. Something as everyday as clothing, women have always found ways to adapt, to endure, to push for something better, even if it took them years. So let me just finish this look with a lip. So that is our almost finished makeup look. Okay, so this is the final look. So this is what I wear every day for school. Let us give our final verdict. Is it a misery or a victory in history? Okay, so let's first assess the cons. The ready-made accessibility of clothing made it harder for women to catch up with the evolving standards of beauty. Unlike before where fashion standards changed per generation, it now changed per year. So this increased the pressure of societal expectations for women. Number two for me, that was really bad. The fact that women were exploited for these textile industries. Often women and children were exploited laborers. There were even people describing living conditions as if they were in pig pens. So it was terrible. It further enabled imperialism. So the impact goes beyond their boundaries because it also extended to the countries where they get their raw materials for. And also, just imagine the conditions of women. So these women also became slaves. And I do think there are a lot of consequences brought about by this shift in fashion. But I do think there are some good points. The lasting impacts of women slowly being introduced into the workforce somehow built the way society is right now. They were not just confined to their homes. They can now do a lot of other things. And that can be seen with how clothing also evolved after the Industrial Revolution. So people are also looking at how women can ride bicycles, how women can participate into the workforce. Now, women are not just seen as housewives. They are seen as people capable of having careers. Weighing the pros and cons, I could still say that this is a victory for history. But I do think it would have been nice if women were not exploited in the first place and that they were not subjected to these kinds of expectations. And so this was a learning experience for me to be kinder to my fellow women. The societal expectations that were placed on us even before still radiates today. I hope this video also serves as women empowerment and know that you are very much worth it. So thanks for watching my video. I hope you did enjoy some of my insights and this cute look. Bye!